Once upon a time, before the cities sparkled with electric lights and villages still carried the scent of raw, earthen soil, there was a small village nestled beneath the shade of ancient trees. In one quiet corner of this village, beneath the gnarled roots of an old Bodhi tree, sat a boy around 10 years old. His clothes were tattered, and his lips were dry and cracked from hunger and thirst. His name was Mohan, a child born into poverty, where his parents toiled daily just to put 2 meals on the table. Life was already unforgiving, but fate seemed even harsher. One day, a great flood swept through the village, washing away everything: homes, belongings, and Mohan's parents. When the waters receded, he was all that remained, stranded among the wreckage. No roof overhead, no familiar arms to hold him, only the silence of the earth and sky, and the sharp ache of an empty stomach. At first, the villagers gave him scraps of bread, a few old blankets, but human compassion has its limits. Soon, people began to turn away. Some mocked, "An orphan like him will only end up begging." Others muttered, "That's just his fate." Mohan slowly learned his first lesson. If he didn't stand up on his own, no one could save him. One overcast morning, without saying a word to anyone, Mohan left the village. He walked toward the nearby city, clinging to a fragile hope. Maybe there, I'll find work. But the city was no promised land. It was a vast labyrinth, full of honking horns, rushing crowds, and people too busy to notice a frail boy trembling with hunger at their feet. He begged for food, slept on sidewalks, and sometimes asked himself, "Is there anyone, anywhere, waiting to help me?" One night, as Mohan curled up on the roadside, a middle-aged man stopped in front of him. He wore simple clothes, had deep-set eyes, and spoke gently. "Son, why are you begging like this?" Mohan looked up, his voice weary. "I have nothing left. I have no choice." The man sighed and sat beside him. "You know, destiny only helps those who don't give up on themselves. If you're willing, I can show you another path. Not easy, but honest." Mohan hesitated. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to him with such warmth. He nodded. "Who are you? And what must I do?" The man smiled. "My name is Ram Sharan. I work at a small shop nearby. If you're willing to work with your own hands, I'll teach you. Not how to beg, but how to stand tall." For the first time, someone believed in him, not out of pity, but out of faith. The next morning, Mohan followed Ram Sharan to a small shop that sold sweets and essential goods. His first task was to sweep the floor and wash dishes. His thin hands burned from the soapy water, but his heart felt awakened. By the end of the day, he was paid 10 rupees and given a warm chapati. Mohan held the bread in his hands and brought it to his nose, inhaling deeply. The smell was nothing like the stale crumbs he'd begged for on the streets. It was the scent of effort, the first taste of dignity. Ram Sharan looked at him fondly. "See? The sweat of hard work always smells better than a beggar's coin." That night, for the first time, Mohan slept with a smile. Beneath the starry sky, he whispered a quiet vow to himself. "From today on, I will live by my own hands and will." In the days that followed, Mohan gradually grew accustomed to life at the shop. Each morning he arrived early to sweep, dust, and wash cups and dishes. Late at night, he left with aching limbs, but a sparkle of joy still shining in his eyes. He was no longer the orphaned child waiting for pity. He was becoming a small part of the real world's rhythm. However, it wasn't long before Mohan realized something important. If all he ever did was sweep and wash, he wouldn't go very far. One evening, when the shop was quiet, he dared to ask, "Uncle Ram, can I learn something more? I want to understand more about the work here." Ram Charan looked deeply into his eyes. It was no longer the gaze of an employer, but of a teacher who had just seen a student express a genuine desire to grow. He nodded. "If you're ready to learn, then you must learn what others are too lazy to do. Don't fear the unfamiliar. Start small, count money, keep records, talk to customers." From that day on, Mohan did more than just physical labor. He learned how to identify different denominations, how to calculate prices, and most importantly, how to listen. Every customer came in with a story, a mood, a habit. Mohan watched them carefully, remembering who liked sweets, who always asked about promotions, and who came just for a quick chat. Then one day, Ram Charan had to step out. Mohan was left to watch the shop alone. He had never done this by himself. Soon, a customer walked in, stopped at the counter and said, "1 kilo of gram flour, please." Mohan's heart pounded. He had never directly served a customer before. But then, he took a deep breath, smiled politely. "Yes, sir. Please give me a moment." He stepped into the storeroom, carefully brought out a bag of flour, and placed it on the scale. Everything went smoothly, and just as he was handing the change to the customer, Ram Charan returned. Seeing Mohan handling the transaction, he couldn't hide his surprise and emotion. "Well done, Mohan. You're improving faster than I expected." That praise was like a beam of light shining into the darkest corner of his heart. For the first time, Mohan felt he was good at something meaningful. But life doesn't always come with praise. A few weeks later, on a particularly busy day, Mohan, in his haste, gave the wrong item to a customer. The customer shouted angrily, and when Ram Charan returned, he was furious. "If you're not ready to manage the shop, then don't take it upon yourself." Mohan froze. He lowered his head, heart sinking to the ground. All the confidence he had just begun to build seemed shattered by a single mistake. He quietly cleaned up, silently asking himself, "Maybe I really can't do anything right." That night, Ram Charan sat beside him, his voice calm and steady. "Son, everyone makes mistakes, but the ones who succeed aren't those who never fall. They're the ones who get up every time they do." Mohan looked at him, a new light flickering in his eyes. It wasn't the look of a child seeking forgiveness, but of someone beginning to understand that failure is an essential part of growing up. From that day on, Mohan no longer feared mistakes. He began learning not just how to serve, but how to manage, organizing goods, tracking inventory, dealing with difficult customers, and finding ways to make people return. He no longer just followed orders. He asked questions, took initiative, and every night, he wrote down in a small notebook the lessons he had learned that day. One evening, Mohan bravely asked, "Uncle Ram, do you think one day I could open my own shop?" Ram Charan smiled and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Of course you can. But you'll need 3 things: patience, belief in yourself, and the readiness to wait for the right moment." Mohan clenched his fists. He knew it wouldn't be easy. He had no money, no land, not even a diploma. But he had one thing no one could take from him: faith in his own worth. From that moment on, Mohan wasn't just working for the shop. He was working for his dream. From that day on, Mohan carried a quiet dream in his heart, to open a small shop of his own. Nothing grand, nothing luxurious, just a place built with his own hands from nothing. But each time he looked into his empty pockets or around the cramped room he rented, that dream felt like it stood in the middle of monsoon winds, swaying, fragile. One afternoon, when business had slowed down, Mohan asked softly, "Uncle Ram, if I don't have any money, is there something more I can do to save up?" Ram Charan looked at him for a long while, then gave a gentle nod. "There's an old man who sells vegetables at the wholesale market. He needs help in the early mornings. You could work there, then come back to the shop afterward. And so, Mohan's life took a new turn. Busier, more exhausting, but more mature with each passing day. At 4 a.m., while the rest of the city still slept, Mohan was already at the market, hauling crates of vegetables, wiping lettuce leaves clean, weighing gourds one by one. As the sun rose, he returned to the shop and worked until evening. Then he'd rush to help sell vegetables again until dusk. There were days when his feet swelled from standing too long. Some nights, he fell asleep still clutching his notebook. But in Mohan's heart, not once did he complain. Every rupee he earned, every coin he tucked into the tin under his bed, was a tiny brick building his dream. Mohan learned that a dream doesn't have to be grand. It just needs to be real enough to wake you up every morning. Even while juggling 2, sometimes 3 jobs, he never neglected his duties. Every customer at the shop was greeted with a sincere smile. He didn't just sell goods, he built goodwill. Gradually, everyone grew fond of Mohan, from the mechanic down the street to the elderly woman selling sweets by the sidewalk. The first few rupees he saved weren't much, but they were built on trust, sweat, and discipline. He never spent wastefully, never bought what wasn't necessary. Once, Ram Charan invited him to dine at a modest restaurant, and Mohan gently declined. Maybe another day? I'm saving every bit I can. Ram Charan said nothing, just gave his shoulder a light pat, the kind of understanding that needed no words. Years passed. Mohan's savings finally allowed him to buy a second-hand pushcart. It wasn't a shop. There was no signboard, no roof, but it was his first real step toward owning something of his own. On his first day selling tea and baked snacks on the street, Mohan was so nervous he nearly spilled an entire kettle of hot tea. But when his first customer stopped by and smiled, saying, "1 hot tea, please," Mohan bowed, poured the tea, and his hands stopped trembling. That first cup of tea, to others, just hot water and sugar. But to Mohan, it was the sky itself, distilled into effort and sacrifice. In the days that followed, people around the neighborhood began to notice the little cart. They came back not just for the good tea, but for the polite young man who always smiled and served with all his heart. He didn't hand out business cards, but his way of living became the clearest business card he could ever offer. One day, Ram Charan stopped by. He saw Mohan behind the cart, hands dusted with flour, shirt faint with tea smoke, but his eyes shining bright. The old man chuckled softly. "Look at you, like a young sapling that finally found its roots after the storm." Mohan bowed, placing a cup of tea before him. "It's because you watered me with those first drops that this tree didn't die." And they sat in silence amid the busy street beside a steaming cup of tea, like a wordless song of faith, perseverance, and gratitude. Time passed like a quiet river. Mohan's tea cart was no longer just a tiny dot on a street corner. Each morning, a long line formed for his hot tea, his warm smile, and the soft, fragrant pastries he made by hand. Mohan never had to shout to sell. His kindness spoke for itself. Gradually, he saved up a bit more. No rush, no splurging. Mohan invested every rupee with care. One day, when he had enough to rent a small space, he opened a humble tea shop, with chairs, a light bulb, and a name: Mohan's Cup of Tea. No flashy signs, just hand-painted letters, but everyone who passed by remembered them. People in the neighborhood began calling him Mohan Bhai, Brother Mohan, the man who listened. Customers didn't just come for tea, they came for admiration. Everyone knew the shop owner had once slept under a bridge, scavenged for bottles, and eaten leftovers, but had never lost faith in life. One day, a scruffy boy stood silently outside the shop. Mohan came out, knelt down, and asked gently, "Are you hungry?" The boy gave a quiet nod, Without another question, Mohan held out his hand. "Come in, wash your face, and give me a hand. No one's born to beg forever." And from that day, a child was given a chance, just like Ram Charan had once given Mohan. Mohan began taking in more street children to help out. He taught them how to brew tea, wipe tables, handle cash. He didn't preach. He simply said, "I used to sleep out there too, just like you. But if you work hard one day, you'll change your fate too." And so, the boy once called the beggar became a teacher with no chalkboard, a boss with no pride, a spark that lit others without needing a stage. One rainy day, Ram Charan, now retired, returned to visit the shop. Mohan rushed out like the boy he once was, bent down, and touched the feet of his old mentor. "Do you see, Uncle? What you taught me, it's alive now." Ram Charan wiped his eyes, overwhelmed. "And now, it's you who teaches the world." Mohan had achieved something extraordinary, not by building a franchise or becoming a millionaire, but by turning memories of abandonment into hands that lifted others. Years later, Mohan's tea shop became a beloved destination in the region, not because of the menu, but because of the story. People whispered to each other, "If you want to know what rising above looks like, go meet Mohan." Mohan didn't change much, still wore his old shirt, still had that gentle smile. But now he had a home, a reputation, a dream that had taken root and borne fruit. One evening, Mohan sat in front of his shop as the golden light of sunset stretched across the street. He looked toward the road he once begged on, where a scrawny little boy had once sat, dry-eyed and hopeless. Today, that boy had stood up. He had rebuilt a life using the very bricks others had thrown away. Mohan gently closed his eyes and whispered, "I don't wish for anything more. If tomorrow never comes, I'll still know I lived right, and I never gave up." Dear friend, if you ever feel life is too cruel, remember Mohan. If you ever feel you have nothing, remember, Mohan started with only 2 hands and a heart. Because fate doesn't favor those who wait. Fate changes when we stand up and take that first step, however slow, but full of trust and love.